and I'm getting mighty tired of your trifling ways and of listening to that jackass Bray.
Talking a little bit about perception versus reality. So this is a little chart, and I'm not going to go through all the numbers and details and nuance, but as we kind of led in talking with Makayla about her competition and the things she noticed versus what I noticed and possibly what other people in the room noticed, it brought us into the idea of how we perceive things as human beings versus what's actually real. So this little chart here shows the visibility spectrum in wavelength nanometers for humans. This little black box here is where we sit. That is where humans operate, plus or minus, obviously, a couple nanometers based on the actual person. But you start way over here at cosmic radiation, you end way over here at AC circuit radiation, with TV and radio broadcasting and all that being on the higher end of stuff that we would probably recognize. This is where humans operate. This is literally all we can see out of all of this spectrum. Kind of wild. We're seeing next to nothing, okay? This chart gives us a little example of the audible hearing frequencies. So you'll notice right here where human beings are at, this nice little purple line here, and some common creatures on the left side. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but you can kind of see there's a general overlap, mostly in this little area here, but you can also see the outliers where these higher frequencies. Way up here, we've got dolphins and whales and porpoises and all that stuff that talk with sonar and all these different things that they can determine and decipher these different frequencies that we can't even really perceive. Some of them, not all. And then obviously you've got the lower end stuff over here, like your owls, your hedgehogs, animals that live and feel vibrations in the ground and stuff like that. They can perceive things a lot differently than we can. So just looking at those two charts, we can scientifically at least somewhat agree that there is a vast range of sights and sounds that as human beings, we're just not capable of picking up or understanding, even if we really want to.
To really understand the brain, you have to understand how the brain processes endless streams of information from the environment and creates a fluid experience in consciousness, from the jarring screech of a police siren to delicious smells enveloping your favorite restaurant. Information from your senses allows you to move smoothly throughout your day-to-day adventures. But how does perception really work? The brain is really like a giant reducing valve, eliminating all of the competing signals from your environment and formulating a coherent picture of what stimuli are most important to every moment. For example, if you're in a smelly bar listening to a talented jazz musician, your brain will naturally eliminate the nefarious smells and focus on the sound of the music. According to Dr. Joe Dispenza, the brain processes 400 billion bits of information per second, but we are only aware of 2,000 of those. Clearly, the brain is processing an inconceivable amount of information that never makes it to conscious awareness. And even with all of this information your brain is taking in from your senses and processing, there are concrete limits to our perception. The range of frequencies that can be picked up by the human ear is 20 to 20,000 hertz. A bat is capable of hearing up to 300 kilohertz. That's up to 150 times more sensitive than a human ear. Human eyesight can only pick up light with a wavelength between 380 and 760 nanometers. This is an extremely small window if you consider the infinite ocean of vibrational energy that we live in. Animals like cats and owls not only have a larger field of vision, but they can also see much better in the dark. Our sense of taste pale in comparison to the large catfish that can have as many as 175,000 taste buds. Humans only have 10,000. As far as odor detection goes, the African elephant trumps all others with 1,948 genes dedicated to smell. Humans place 13th in the animal kingdom with 396 olfactory genes. Signals from touch receptors paint a very important picture of the world in our brains. Touch receptors are not distributed evenly over the body. The fingertips and tongue may have as many as 100 per square centimeter. The back of the hand fewer than 10 per square centimeter. Our skin also has receptors for pain, temperature, and proprioceptors that sense the position of the different parts of the body in relation to each other and the surrounding environment. The star-nosed mole eclipses the human sense of touch with more than 6 times the amount of sensitivity of the entire human hand, just on its nose. There have also been reports since antiquity of a 6th human sense, the ability to receive information directly through our minds. As humans, we take in all of this data from the environment and experience reality in fluid, conscious intervals. Before that happens, each specialized part of the brain works together and processes these signals into a meaningful worldview. Let's dive into each section of the brain and develop a better understanding of how we process human reality.
Kay, I know you work a lot with animals, insects, that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on what we just saw?
I definitely think it's true. These guys definitely sense a lot more than I do. I work with a lot of different types of like invertebrates, and you can tell they do not see the world as humans do at all. Like vibrations, just like a change in somebody stepping around, they notice that way more than we ever could. I also notice like different pressure changes. They notice all of that way more than we can.
Like barometric pressure?
Mm-hmm. Or
Really?
like shop I work in, sometimes when you open one of the doors, it'll make the other door like pop a little bit just from the pressure changing in there. And some of the roaches and stuff, you can kind of tell like they move a little bit for it.
Wild.
Yeah.
CK, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously our level of perception is geared towards something very specific, as are animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't have everything. You can't be a superhuman or a superhero. You know,
Speak
you
for
can't
yourself,
have all
bro.
of the. But it's yeah, a dog can hear better than me, but I'm at the top of the food chain. So what's up? You know, it's all just geared towards evolution, right? I mean, I think we probably cut away a lot of the stuff that's not necessary for us.
Sure.
And we're left with a pretty robust set of senses contextually for, you know, where we're at in the food chain.
Absolutely.
So,
well, a dog will also lick his own ass for sport, right?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, some humans do that shit too, dude. So I don't know.
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it.
But honestly, Charlie here, I've told you this before. He was given to me from Service Dogs of Florida because I grew up with him. He can smell like when I have an issue where I go get low blood pressure. A dog can sense that. He's able to tell me that before my blood pressure drops enough, so I was able to sit down without fainting.
Heck yeah.
So,
and it's like amazing. That. I didn't mean to cut you off. It's amazing. Like they use them for, they've got all kinds of disease sniffing dogs, you know, cancer sniffing dogs. Like it's insane. Oh boy, what just happened here?
Go lay down.
Yeah, that definitely is crazy. It's like, how do you even smell that shit? Like,
right?
But I mean, their sensors are just sharp.
I was worried about how they smell all that cocaine, but here we go.
Like the gyroscope top. It's your own life. Because you could see very simply that you would not understand the experience that you call voluntary action and decision, being in control and being yourself, unless in opposition to that, there was something else. You couldn't realize self and control and will unless there was something other, out of control, and instead of will, won't. It's the two together only that produces the sensation that you call having a personal identity. Only, there is a funny thing about human consciousness, which has been worked out very carefully in Gestalt psychology, which is that our attention is captured by the figure rather than the background, by the relatively enclosed area rather than the diffuse area, and by something moving rather than what is relatively still. And to all those phenomena that in this way attract our attention, we attribute a higher degree of reality than the ones we don't notice. That's only because, for the moment, those are more important to us. Consciousness, you see, is a radar that is scanning the environment to look out for trouble. Just in the same way as a ship's radar is looking for rocks or other ships. And the radar, therefore, does not notice the vast areas of space where there are no rocks, no other ships. So in the same way, our eyes, or rather the selective consciousness behind the eyes, only pays attention to what we think is important. And so in this way, we have this rather myopic way of looking at things. And we screen out from attention anything that is not immediately important to a scanning system based on sensing danger. But quite obviously, you as a complete individual are much more than the scanning system. You are in relationships with the external world that on the whole are incredibly harmonious. Going back to this illustration of every living body as something like the flame of a candle, the energies of life in the form of temperature, light, air, and food, and so on, are streaming through you all at this moment in the most magnificently harmonious way. And you're, all of you, far more beautiful than any candle flame. Just sitting in these chairs, just going. You know? Only we're so used to it. We say about that, so what? Show me something interesting. Show me something new. Because it's a characteristic of consciousness that it ignores stimuli that are constant.
So I'm a fan of the philosopher Alan Watts. If you've seen some of our other episodes, I'll reference him every once in a while. But for me, that's can be boiled down to one of those simple adages that we've kind of been trained to see objects or the space around us as the matter defining the space rather than the space defining the matter, meaning like all the objects in my bedroom are what make the space up rather than the space containing the objects. And according to what Mr. Watts was saying there, part of that is because of the innate nature, our fight or flight instincts, our survival instincts. We pay attention to what we need, or we pay attention to what needs attention paid to it in order to ensure our survival. Constant stimuli, that noise that's always going off, our brain categorizes and realizes it's not a threat because it's always going off and puts it to the back burner. That is to say that it's still going on, but we just make it less significant based on the fact that it's not a threat and that our brains do this stuff naturally. So I'll start with you, Makayla. I'd like to hear what you guys think on the video, but more specifically, that hierarchy of processing all the information that's coming into our brain, the things that get put to the back end, right? If I'm keyed on something different than you, Makayla, or different than you, Chris, and I notice things in the same given situation, maybe a little different than you do, because your hierarchy is different than mine, does that make what I notice more or less factual than what you do?
No, I kind of like that, to look at that like from two different spots. One, I have to perceive it differently, so that way, the way I see it, the way you see it, and the way Cosman sees it, if we're all in a situation together, if we combine the way we see it, we have a pretty clear picture of the whole situation rather than each of our own individual looks at it. So I feel like we're building a more clear picture by combining a bunch of different outlooks on it. It just like with us all going over my fight footage, me looking at it, I see it completely differently. Like, you can point out things that there's no way I'm ever going to see. Or when I'm in the situation, you're telling me to go at something that there's an arm here, but for some reason, I just can't see that arm in the situation. My head is too focused on a choke or something that I'm not paying attention to what's going on out here in left field for the arm. So if somebody else's perspective on it to be like, hey, attack that, is extremely helpful.
Sure. So for what he spoke about there, and use your most recent fight as a frame of reference, do you find any truth in what he's talking about in terms of how our brain prioritizes this stuff. Like, all right, that thing that she's doing that I'm noticing isn't a threat, so I'm going to put that in the back of my head. Like, did you see that happening at all? Or was everything just kind of coming at you in a flash? Or from what he described, how did that like overlay to your experience?
Yeah, no, for sure. As I was saying with the triangle, at first I did not feel threatened. I felt like I had plenty of space and plenty of time to work out. I felt like I could fully breathe, even though she was technically in the triangle position. I didn't feel a choke.
Mhm.
So I was giving myself way too much time and being way too slow getting out of it, not technical enough. And that kind of put me in a worse situation.
Right on.
But I was too focused on just trying to stack, and I wasn't trying to think about where her positioning was or anything other than stacking, honestly.
Smash.
Yeah.
CK.
I have an opinion, but I just want to say, Kay, don't say that you'll never see what Jay sees. You will. It's just an experience difference, you know.
Absolutely.
I just, when you said that, I was like, no, I want to. But anyways, I think. So let me draw two comparisons in terms of perception from my own skill set. So, talking about safely unloading firearms, I have a process that I follow every single time that I do it. That is, in talking about a handgun, dropping the magazine out, the source of ammunition, separating it from the gun, racking the slide to get the projectile out of it, and then visually and tactile checking to make sure that there isn't a cartridge in the barrel. The reason that I do both is because what we've seen in the past, people will be looking for a cartridge. And if they see a cartridge, they'll say, okay, great, there's a cartridge. Let the slide go home, pull the trigger, and boom. That was basically a malfunction of the brain. But if you tactilely check and insert your finger into the chamber to make sure that the chamber is empty, then you have two sources of perception checking one another to make sure that what you actually want, you're getting, which is an empty chamber. So that's just one of those funny things that where our brain, it assumes what it thinks you want to see. And that can be a deadly mistake in terms of firearms. The other is, being aware, right? People always talk about that. Well, it's like, how do you aware, right? That's not really a thing. You can't aware, but what you can do is you can pull your attention away from the thing that might be robbing it or robbing you of it, so that when you're transitioning from a parking lot into a mall or a store, for instance, you can be generally more aware of your surroundings. So you see a problem coming before it gets to you. So that's another source of perception. If you've got one person that is sucked into their phone, walking through a transitional space, and another person that has the phone put away and their head up, actively looking for things. I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm just looking. One of the other person is probably going to be the victim, and I'm sure you know which of the two it's going to be. So you may still miss the cues if you don't know what you're looking for, but at least you can give yourself the advantage of opening up your perception to see those cues coming. So I like how he talks about, really it's just, we're so focused on things, and because we can't possibly be aware of everything at the same time, because if we were, we'd probably go crazy. It's too much information. So we get rid of what we think is unimportant and focus on what we think is important, but sometimes that's the wrong answer. So
yeah, it that example brings to mind, and I'm going to make another nerd reference, but what was it, like X-Men First Class or whatever, when Professor X gets his abilities and he starts hearing everybody's thoughts at once, and he's like, ah! It's just overwhelming, man.
Exactly.
Like, yep. Yeah. So if you really think about the level of processing that these supercomputers already do, and like you said, it's comparatively I mean, for us, obviously, it's just what we're used to, but comparatively, it's fairly little information. And the amount of processing that these computers do for us to generate a three-dimensional space, to judge time, distance, relative height, weight, all that stuff. There's a lot of systems running at the same time. So the more in tune you can be with this information going into it, it's probably got to be better for you overall, right? Processing and filtering the information more efficiently can typically, I would assume, and maybe you guys might have a different opinion, I would think it might lead you to a better place of being able to act on it more efficiently as well. Like you said, Chris, the added layer of adding other senses, right? If I'm walking from my car to the Publix, I can hear. If someone grabs my arm, I can feel. But that added layer of my attention by adding my eyes, like you said, to the situation, can infinitely tie those other two zones of information that I'm getting together and create a much better, broader picture. Makes perfect sense to me. So,
and each of the senses confirm what the other thinks.
Absolutely. And it's all an overlay. You know what I mean? This one feeds into that one, which feeds into that one. And like you said, it's confirmation by committee. You know what I'm saying? So you're less likely to be wrong the more senses you have involved. I think that's like dead ass. The reason that I kind of brought up the space defining matter, not the matter defining space, is because as it goes to our perception, it's just like Watts said, it's the other end that we're not really paying attention to, right? We notice the stuff that air quotes needs noticing, but all the rest of it kind of goes by the wayside. This one's a little bit longer. It's the last video I got. And I'll be done with the screen share, but I wanted to play this one just for a little bit of context as far as what we're talking about here.
The ancient Greeks had a great idea. The universe is simple. In their minds, all you needed to make it were four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. As theories go, it's a beautiful one. It has simplicity and elegance. It says that by combining the four basic elements in different ways, you can produce all the wonderful diversity of the universe. Earth and fire, for example, give you things that are dry. Air and water, things that are wet. But as theories go, it had a problem. It didn't predict anything that could be measured. And measurement is the basis of experimental science. Worse still, the theory was wrong. But the Greeks were great scientists of the mind, and in the 5th century BC, Leucippus of Miletus came up with one of the most enduring scientific ideas ever. Everything we see is made up of tiny, indivisible bits of stuff called atoms. This theory is simple and elegant, and it has the advantage over the earth, air, fire, and water theory of being right. Centuries of scientific thought and experimentation have established that the real elements, things like hydrogen, carbon, and iron, can be broken down into atoms. In Leucippus's theory, the atom is the smallest indivisible bit of stuff that's still recognizable as hydrogen, carbon, or iron. The only thing wrong with Leucippus's idea is that atoms are, in fact, divisible. Furthermore, his atoms idea turns out to explain just a small part of what the universe is made of. What appears to be the ordinary stuff of the universe is, in fact, quite rare. Leucippus's atoms, and the things they're made of, actually make up only about 5% of what we know to be there. Physicists know the rest of the universe, 95% of it, as the dark universe, made of dark matter and dark energy. How do we know this? Well, we know because we look at things and we see them. That might seem rather simplistic, but it's actually quite profound. All the stuff that's made of atoms is visible. Light bounces off it and we can see it. When we look out into space, we see stars and galaxies. Some of them, like the one we live in, with beautiful spiral shapes spinning gracefully through space. When scientists first measured the motion of groups of galaxies in the 1930s and weighed the amount of matter they contained, they were in for a surprise. They found that there's not enough visible stuff in those groups to hold them together. Later measurements of individual galaxies confirmed this puzzling result. There's simply not enough visible stuff in galaxies to provide enough gravity to hold them together. From what we can see, they ought to fly apart, but they don't. So there must be stuff there that we can't see. We call that stuff dark matter. The best evidence for dark matter today comes from measurements of something called the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang. But that's another story. All of the evidence we have says that dark matter is there and accounts for much of the stuff in those beautiful spiral galaxies that fill the heavens. So where does that leave us? We've long known that the heavens do not revolve around us, and that we're residents of a fairly ordinary planet orbiting a fairly ordinary star in a spiral arm of a fairly ordinary galaxy. The discovery of dark matter took us one step further away from the center of things. It told us that the stuff we're made of is only a small fraction of what makes up the universe. But there was more to come. Earlier this century, scientists studying the outer reaches of the universe confirmed that not only is everything moving apart from everything else, as you'd expect in a universe that began in a hot, dense Big Bang, but that the universe's expansion also seems to be accelerating. What's that about? Either there's some kind of energy pushing this acceleration, just like you provide energy to accelerate a car, or gravity does not behave exactly as we think. Most scientists think it's the former, that there's some kind of energy driving the acceleration, and they've called it dark energy. Today's best measurements allow us to work out just how much of the universe is dark. It looks as if dark energy makes up about 68% of the universe, and dark matter about 27%, leaving just 5% for us and everything else we can actually see. So what's the dark stuff made of? We don't know, but there's one theory called supersymmetry that could explain some of it. Supersymmetry, or SUSY for short, predicts a whole range of new particles, some of which could make up the dark matter. If we found evidence for SUSY, we could go from understanding 5% of our universe, the things we can actually see, to around a third. Not bad for a day's work. Dark energy will probably be harder to understand, but there are some speculative theories out there that might point the way. Among them are theories that go back to that first great idea of the ancient Greeks, the idea that we began with several minutes ago, the idea that the universe must be simple. These theories predict that there is just a single element from which all the universe's wonderful diversity stems, a vibrating string. The idea is that all the particles we know today are just different harmonics on the string. Unfortunately, string theories today are as yet untestable. But with so much of the universe waiting to be explored, the stakes are high. Does all this make you feel small? It shouldn't. Instead, you should marvel in the fact that, as far as we know, you are a member of the only species in the universe able even to begin to grasp its wonders, and you're living at the right time to see our understanding explode.
If everything that we can see and perceive is only 5% of what is in air quotes existence, is what we're living in actually reality? CK.
Repeat the question, please.
If we assume these numbers to be correct, and visible light as we know it through atomic solids, subatomic particles, atoms as we understand them, things that create matter as we understand it, and the way we perceive it, which is light bouncing off of it. All of that, my desk, my hat, me as a person, all this shit makes up about 5% of the matter and the energy in the perceived universe. Is our interpretation of that 5% enough to be reality if we don't have a grasp on 95% of what's going on around us?
Yes and no.
Do tell. I like it.
Right?
That's the point, baby. Let's go. Jump in.
So the reality that I live in is sufficient. So that is why I say yes. Sufficient in that I can interact with my reality with the tools that I have now. I don't need the perception to see the other 95% because the other 95%, so far as I can tell, has absolutely no bearing on my day-to-day existence. Right? Now it could have.
I was going to say, aside from your cells just, coming apart and you turn it into a big walking ball of orange juice pulp, yeah.
If I was provided evidence that the other 95% actually had a tangible impact on my reality, then yeah, I could say that, okay, now I'm living in a reality, but I don't know what that other 95% looks like, and so it's immaterial to me, I guess I would say. And maybe we find out what this other 95% is, and it's still immaterial. It still doesn't have a direct impact on what we see and perceive. And and we're not at a space evolutionarily where it even matters, you know.
Is it fair to say, assuming everything we just saw is true, is it fair to say that our version of reality is reality?
I do, because I think reality is way too loosely defined. I feel like we all kind of have our own little versions of reality. And then if we start getting more into what reality is, we start talking about simulation theory and all different other types of things. Whereas like, there Sims, like, is their reality a true reality, or is it just a simulation, you know? So I feel like that's way too loosely defined. So my reality is my reality. So therefore it is a reality, you know?
Sure. So the ownership of the reality is what makes it, I think, maybe a little bit more real from what you're saying. You have a lot of experience with, like you said, with animals and stuff. So let me ask another question. So your dog, we know as human beings that philosophy and calculus and politics are a real thing. Your dog is very real. I just saw your dog. Your dog has no concept of who our president is or how to conjugate a verb or calculus. They're very real to us. Your dog operates within that same reality, but those things are non-existent to your dog. So does that make them real, not real, or subjectively real, I guess?
That's exactly my point. His reality is mostly this bedroom, the yard, and occasional car rides. He doesn't get to go see where I work. He doesn't go to the gym. He's not aware of any of that stuff existing at all, but it doesn't make his reality any less real than my reality, where I'm seeing so many more spaces than his.
So awareness, at least to some degree, dictates reality.
I think reality is more a little bit of a creation of the brain, you know? I think even something who's not completely aware, like think of a tiny little bug outside, like an ant. They don't know what they're doing. They know they have to go create this very specific colony with very specific mathematical dimensions to every single little tube to make sure it doesn't cave in. They don't know why they're doing that, but they're just doing it. You know, they don't have a full perception of what's going on, but they still have a reality to them.
Their reality, right? So
their reality.
Absolutely. That's and I love your perspective. That's good. So I'll flip that same question back over to CK then. At what point, and this is kind of where I was leading to, at what point does the merger of perception of reality here versus perception of reality here have to or not overlap? Does it stop being real when it gets to the point of the ant perceiving it? Because it was real when I perceived it. Just because the ant can't perceive it, does that make it less real? And it kind of goes, and you're seeing where I'm kind of feeding back into that dark energy question, right? With our perception and what's actually real.
Yeah. So Kay's dog has a sufficient level of perception in order to interact with the reality that he has, right?
Correct.
He doesn't know about president and all the rest of the stuff.
To a certain extent, it overlaps a certain degree into our reality. But like you said, concepts, these ideas might be beyond it, but there are certain aspects of that animal's reality that directly overlap with what we call reality.
I would only say that, like, humans have much more powerful brains, right, than a dog. And with that is included the ability to imagine things, sometimes very vividly. And your ability to perceive and sense things as a human can't necessarily be trusted because of the ability to imagine things. I mean, you know, people that are psychotic can see things that are not there objectively, right? Or perhaps they're operating at a different level of perception and are seeing things that I can't see. That would be a fun idea, right? I hope that's not the case.
Demons.
Yeah. So, but you know, it's a sticky subject because sometimes people use it to defend their points of view on things. To just say everything is subjective and nothing really means anything, and dudes can have babies. And I just, I'm not buying it. So I think that there is an objective reality. Whether or not I can identify what that is, I can only use the senses that I've been given to come to a conclusion. And that's all anybody can do. But that doesn't mean any one person is right more than the other unless we agree upon certain things, certain objective realities, how we interact with our reality. If we don't agree on those things, then we'll never agree who is actually dealing with reality and who's dealing with fantasy. And you see that a lot now. And I really get annoyed by the subjectivity of stuff. And just as soon as you assign subjectivity to things, then nobody can be right, nobody can be wrong, and it's all just pointless, But I do believe that there is an objective reality, like your 6 and 9 thing, right? Well, what about the perspective of the person that perhaps wrote that down on a piece of paper, right? They're looking at it from the top and writing a 6 and a 9. And those two fools are arguing about it when realistically, the person that was above it had an objective reality, and that's what they wrote down. So it's sure, yeah.
Why do you feel the need to find a right and wrong if it's something outside that does not affect you directly? If it's something that has no bearing on your day-to-day or what you have to see, why do you have to find an answer inside of it to find if it's real or fake?
Well, to be fair, I really only have that desire when it does affect me. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to go down like a rabbit hole of politics, but if somebody is trying to say to me, I believe in XYZ, therefore there should be this political policy, and I perceive what they're talking about to be more fantasy or not based in objective reality, that's where I take issue. But those things do affect me directly, conceivably. So I don't want to bring up specific examples, but only if they affect me do I actually seek to challenge those things.
So I'll throw this over to Kay then. We've heard, and we don't have to be, again, specific, we'll talk generally here, but I kind of like where the conversation's heading. We've heard the phrase over and over and over again, people saying, I'm living my truth, or that's my truth. Where, Makayla specifically, and I'm asking, not for you to defend, but your opinion, where does that line stop then of, okay, that's your truth and that's great, keep it over there, versus, okay, I'm a sympathetic person, I'm a person with empathy, we're building community, I'm going to allow a certain amount of your truth in so we can develop as, in a relationship or as a person or whatever the situation might be. Where does that onus on the person versus the community begin?
Yeah, so I don't know. It sounds so vague when I say it, but
it's super vague. That's why we're talking.
So vaguely, I don't think, your truth versus my truth, or you can have your own truth, is even an issue. I don't think that there is a truth and non-truth there to argue. I mean, yeah, okay, so you brought up the trans, and we won't get specific on that, but I understand there's male and female, but if somebody else decides to freaking identify as a bird, it's not gonna change anything about me, and I can let them go about their own life, no problem, and I don't have to argue it, as long as there's that point. But I
want to meet bird person, by the way.
Trying to stay real vague there, so as big as possible.
I appreciate that. Keeping the bird controversy to a minimum.
I'm sure there's going to be a bird community coming after me soon. But I don't find the need to argue what somebody else feels. If somebody else, I don't want to take responsibility for somebody else's feelings, or we've had some issues in the past weeks where people can feel certain ways, but if I haven't done anything to cause that, it does not affect me, it does not come near me, there's no reason for me to even bother figuring out why they feel that way. I have no need to know what I did or what happened to make them feel that way. They can have their own side liar, you know?
So, and that's perfectly acceptable, right? We're not going to take ownership of whatever is going on in their reality. But at the same time, if we give credence to allow for people to have their own expression within this version of their interpreted reality, there might be one of those situations where we're talking about, person X says, that fucking Makayla, I never liked her. She's done me wrong every time I've seen her. You're living in your world where you're like, I've never even spoken to you. I have no idea what you're talking about. They're living in their world, 6 versus 9 thing. She ignores me every time I see her. Blah, 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 blah. Different details, same exact situation. Obviously, you don't have to own their feelings, but something like that could come to a head. Not saying that it necessarily will. And again, I completely acknowledge what you're saying about not owning their feelings, but is there a responsibility at that point to encourage that collaborative reality that you guys have both mentioned?
I haven't found that to be the case. I find that over time, as long as I make my to other people and I don't have to be involved with that person, and I let myself be shown truly to other people that I care more about, then there's never been a reason for me to go outwardly and be like, no, that's not true. People who know me would know it's not true. So again, I don't find a real reason to defend myself or justify somebody's feelings or anything of the sort. Just let other people see for themselves with the reality. I don't have to justify my own reality.
Virtue and truth and honesty in your action will usually always point towards truth. So that's sage words, young lady. CK.
I don't know. I got a lot of thoughts rolling around. So I think society is ordered by an agreement, a general agreement about what things are and their place in the universe and our place in relationship to it. Those things are changing constantly, right? I take issue not with somebody that's living their own truth, but a person that is living their own truth and wants me to abide by it and entertain it actively. I think if you have a society that's disordered like that, where there's no objective reality, people can't agree on definitions of things, and things are changing in such a rapid pace that nobody knows. We're all abiding by a certain level of unspoken rules, right? And like the example Makayla was talking about, the hypothetical situation where one person doesn't like another person because of whatever perceived slight that may or may not have happened. Well, Makayla has a more mature perspective on that. I don't own that person's feelings. Like, I didn't do anything. So I'm completely secure knowing that that person is just making some shit up, right? Whereas the other person had a immature perspective on what might have happened and took something wrong way. But that person arguably hasn't developed enough or understood what the rules and order of society are to be able to operate in it. So that person, I don't want to say that person should be excluded from society, but they need to understand what their place in the hierarchy is, right? In order to operate within society, because they don't know what the rules are, or their perception is immature or underdeveloped, or whatever the case is. So I don't really take issue with people fantasizing whatever they want. It's just when I'm forced to entertain it and I know that it's not objectively based whatsoever. I think a lot of these people have underdeveloped or immature perspectives, and they're wielding it in society by means of political force. So that's where I take issue.
So basically, it's all good until it gets to the threshold of your front door. Once I got to
Pretty
deal
much.
with it,
Yeah.
it's a problem. Yeah, no, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that within societies, we all have this sometimes spoken, mostly unspoken agreement of baseline, whether it's objective truth, facts, morals, virtue. There's a agreed upon baseline of where we're going to reference from. Things are wrong based on this baseline. You're a good person or a bad person based on this. You're in jail, you're out of jail, whatever. Societal baseline.
And it ebbs and flows.
That's it. That was the next question. What happens when it changes dramatically? Makayla.
I don't quite agree with that. I don't think there's good, bad people. I also don't agree with us having.
Let me reset. I lost you there. You don't think that the societal baseline is a real thing, or you don't think? Okay.
Thing. I'm not saying jail does not exist.
No. I'm trying to get where you're coming from. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think what Kosman was saying about how. Sorry, back to your point. I don't think there's relatively good and bad people. I feel like we do good and bad actions, and over time things tend to even out. I don't, as Cosmo was saying, putting people into a hierarchy. I feel like too many people have an obsession with saying, I'm higher than you, you need to know your place, you are here. And too many people are also trying to go out of their place too. I understand that people are trying to get higher than they should be, quicker than they should be. And that's also a problem. I find that over time, actions tend to speak pretty loud and karma kind of comes around. If you are trying to get ahead before your time, you're going to start falling behind. Even if you might get a little ahead quickly, you're going to start falling behind somewhere and end up where you're supposed to be. Outside of politics and outside of legislation, I find that's pretty true in just life. Somebody who's, we're going to break it down to like jiu-jitsu again, skipping the basics and jumping to extreme fancy shit, going straight for leg locks and shit without knowing how to pass guard, you're gonna mess up somewhere when it comes to competition because you don't have a foundation. You're jumping ahead. I feel like you're gonna find your place at some point. It might not be really quickly, but you're gonna get knocked down. So it's not up to me to put you in your place.
So if the predetermined place for that person, whether or not it takes your correction or for you, we'll put it back to you, the place of where we're supposed to be operating from, and whether it's the person or the action, good, bad, in the middle, we can leave that determination up to the courts, at least at this point. That baseline moves, the Overton window shifts. Behavior, actions, thoughts that used to be perfectly cool and acceptable for Makayla have suddenly shifted over to the other side of societally, it's not acceptable now. Is that incumbent upon you as the individual to then change and adapt to what society is doing, or forge your own path and ask to be respected for your wishes within said society?
And again, that goes back to my point of just, if it doesn't affect you and it doesn't bring like, I don't think there's good and wrong. Like,
sure,
I do some non-societal standard things that probably are not great to some middle-aged women, that doesn't make it like make me an awful person. That just means we have a difference in opinion,
Sure.
I feel like not everybody needs to fall in this one little spectrum.
Absolutely. And from the biggest like consistent thing that I've heard from you that I'm like really enjoying hearing is just put in some honest work and you'll be okay. It seems like a big theme from Kay. I like that.
Happen, and something's gonna happen eventually.
That's it. That dog will always end up catching your ass. You better be ready for it. Good shit. CK, thoughts on what Kay just said?
I'd like to ask for you to kind of expand on what you mean when you say you don't think there are good or bad people necessarily, just so I can better understand your position.
Okay, so a lot of people, when people say that, are going to jump to the extreme and be like, well, serial killers and cannibals exist. Okay, there's evil, there's people who do very bad shit, and there's bad, harmful actions, but I don't think, okay, I feel like people should be punished for their actions, but I don't think that action's forever going to define somebody. I think that people can change, people can have new ideas, and people can realize where they were wrong in the past and completely come out different people. I'm not saying murderers should be released, but I'm saying somebody who can come back and be like, hey, I'm sorry, I changed my opinion, you know? And so I don't feel like we're so stuck on defining somebody on one thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you can be redeemed.
Yeah, a good person can make a bad act.
Sure.
And
sure.
Even a action, it can be a bad action without malicious intent too.
Right. Absolutely. I guess that's kind of what I was saying in terms of those baselines. You know, there's unspoken agreements, if you will, amongst society, or sometimes spoken and written down agreements, such as the case with murder, right? We all say murder is bad. That action is bad. Anybody that takes part in that action should be punished to some certain degree, right? But there's always that baseline. So I think some people look at the changes that are rapidly happening recently, and maybe they're fearful, right? That baseline is changing so quickly and rapidly in one direction, where nothing matters, everything's subjective. Where they might say, well, what's next, right? Is murder now okay? And I know I'm being hyperbolic. I'm just making an extreme example. I don't think people like rapid change. You know, they resist
change. People resist changes in general, right? It's scary to a lot of people.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think you and I more or less disagree on what the baseline is. I think your baseline is more based off of social standards and what's more socially acceptable to the masses, and mine is more over harm versus good. It might not be socially acceptable, but I don't consider that bad. If it's not harming another human or another life or the environment, not harming something, it's more of an indifferent standard, you know? I don't have a problem with it offending somebody if it's not harming someone.
And again, it's that perspective thing, because you're saying that you guys kind of disagree on the baseline, but sitting here listening to both of you, you're both extremely fucking libertarian. Do what you want to do. Don't fucking bother me. Like honestly, you're talking about the nuance, but within that very same realm, you guys are kind of talking about the same point.
So politically, I'm libertarian, and then like culturally, I'm conservative.
Sure. So social conservative. I got you.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of bring it back around and, you know, start winding it down here. But with that same question that I asked before on the on one of those videos that we watched when we were talking about dark energy and dark matter and space defining the matter within it versus the matter within a space defining said space, to the point that you guys were both making and the nuance we were kind of discussing, regardless of how we determine it's bad, okay, put that aside for right now, does the bad action make bad person, or does the intent of person make action good or bad? Makayla.
Okay. I think there has to be a little bit of both, because you can completely have good intent and do something terrible accidentally, you know? So I think there has to be a combination of a little bit of both. You have to look at the full picture instead of dividing it into little sections. I think that's the only way you're going to get a clear answer on it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I guess that comes back to, you can't really see the full picture. You're only going to see like the front of what's right in front of you. You're not going to see, you're going to see what your brain is telling you need to see.
CK.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Intent is a really powerful thing, especially when you talk about law, right? You know, if you intended to harm somebody, that's culturally a lot worse than oops, you know.
We have different charges for it, right?
Right. And as we should, right?
Sure.
Because there are mistakes do happen. And there's even, to take it a step further, there's even precognitive versus doing something malicious and with intention. So premeditated murder versus an act of aggression in the moment, in the heat of the moment.
Mhm.
Those are two different things that are distinguished in law, again, as they should be. If you premeditate murdering somebody and then carry out that action, the idea is that you had time to say, well, maybe that's not a great idea, right? Whereas if in the heat of the moment you get into a bar fight or whatever and you beat somebody over the head with a beer bottle and they die, that's terrible. But you really didn't have the opportunity to think about it and make a conscious decision otherwise. Now, of course, you always have the choice to make another choice, but it's different. Ruminating on something and still carrying out the action given a pretty long duration of time is worse.
Is that worse based on your opinion or how society views it? Going back to what Makayla was saying.
Both. I mean, my opinion is shared amongst society,
Okay.
and I think I would certainly argue that. I mean, we are emotional creatures,
For
right?
sure.
So there's certainly you can be forgiven for having an outburst of emotion. You know, like just having an argument with somebody and calling them a name, right? You didn't really mean it, but in the heat of the moment, you wanted to express your emotion, and that's the way that you chose to do it. But the duration of time was very small. And so, yeah, again, you can always make a choice to do something different, but you acted on emotion. Whereas if you get into an argument with somebody and you have time to cool off and you still make the decision, instead of calling them a bad name, you're going to kill them. Yeah, that's worse because you were given the time to remove emotion from the equation. And despite that, you still carried out the bad action. So yeah, I would say it's worse objectively.
So you and Makayla pretty much agree, except yours has a couple more layers to it. You're willing to dredge into the nuance a little bit more of asking the why question. Whereas I think she's kind of just like, all right, you didn't get me, cool, see ya, fuck off. You know what I'm saying? So I think you guys actually agree quite a bit. That's awesome. Last thing I wanted to throw out, and Kay, I don't know, honestly, I don't know what you listen to, if anything, like podcast wise. So I'm curious as to your opinion on this. CK, I'm familiar with your listening habits. We talk quite a bit, but just because it's popular, I want to throw it out there, and it ties right into what we're talking about, the recent Joe Rogan controversy. There's been a lot of stuff going at him for multiple different reasons, and I don't really care whether or not anybody likes the guy. But most recently, there was a video that popped up of him saying a racial slur that from about 12 years ago, and it's a collaborative video. It's like a mashup of literally clips of him saying the word with zero context, and it's sliced together. He has seen it and since released a video addressing it. In my opinion, might have made it a little bit worse for him in addressing the video, but I don't disagree with anything he said. It's ugly on the surface because you click on this video and it's like 3 minutes long. It's N-word, 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 F-word, N-word, 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 R-word, N-word, N-word. It's not good. But contextually, if you've listened to some of these clips, you know, with 30 seconds on either side of it, you'll see that he's quoting a comedian's bit. He is talking about offensive rap lyrics. He's talking about a news story a lot. I'm not going to say 100% because I can't speak definitively like that. But a lot of the times there is a context behind it versus him pointing and saying, you are this, that, or the next, and I am better than you. So with all of that kind of setting the stage, and again, only because I don't know your level of where you're at as far as knowing about the story, Kat. The video exists of him saying these words. Okay. He's come out and addressed it. Is the perception of people that don't listen to his show, that are, you know, making calls to people that support him, more important than the reality of the people that are familiar with the guy, meaning it is real. We can't argue it's an objective reality that that video exists, that he said those words. However, that reality, as objective as it might be, is dramatically out of context. Again, like you said, Chris, if we're willing to ask a couple of those deeper questions, we get a better understanding of it. The perception of what's going on versus the reality of the situation. Chris, I'm going to leave you because I know I'm sure you've got an opinion on this. I'm really curious to hear what Makayla thinks. The perception of what's going on with this guy as a comedian, as a podcast host, as a supposed racist, versus the reality of how this guy lives his life, and hard pause, what's being presented via social media and the news. What are your thoughts on the whole situation, Kev?
Mm-hmm. So I do listen to Joe Rogan. I usually always doing that work. So I was not aware of any of that. The last controversy I saw was something about the vaccine and a doctor he interviewed.
It's been snowballing. So this just came out like 2 days ago, and they pulled stuff from like 12 years ago of him sitting with like comedians, and it's an ugly compilation. It's ugly. But go ahead.
Well, anyways, that goes to the point of what I was saying is I don't feel the need to explain. I feel like the people that are calling his boss, let's say they're calling the label he works for, I'm not sure if he owns his own label or not, but he calls somebody that he works for. I would hope that the people he works for will go and watch and see what the context actually was and see the full truth behind it before making a decision based off of something they heard. They will let the person.
Let me jump in real quick just to give you more info. I don't want to cut you off, but they've since, this was like 3 days ago, they've since pulled 71 episodes from the archive of his show. The president of the company said that it was Joe's decision. He pulled the episodes because of things that he said. There's obviously other sides of that story saying that Spotify preemptively pulled it because of controversy. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't agree with censorship at all. I don't care what's said, as long as it's, again, back to my point of not harming people or anything. If it's not children and not harming people, I don't believe in censorship whatsoever. So I don't agree with that being pulled, no matter what he was saying. Even if he wanted to pull it, that's a whole other story. But somebody pulling it because of what may or may not have been said with or without context is awful. But the point being is these people are taking it without context and getting upset over the words that were said. And I can't speak with, I have not seen the video whatsoever, so I can't speak on what was said. But if they're acting on it without context, I would hope that the people higher in charge would be able to take a step back and look at all of the videos Joe Rogan's released, look back at the full video from like a minute before and a minute after whatever was said, and see the context of it before making a final decision, letting him speak for himself rather than people who don't know him speak for him.
What is your opinion then of the video that he released himself, explaining and basically saying it's an ugly video, it's gross, there's no excuse or reason that a white person should say that word, period?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than doubling down and kind of just put his tail between his legs. But he's taking, like you said, he's taking that responsibility for their feelings. What are your thoughts on him making that video?
I've not seen the video whatsoever, so I really don't feel like I can speak on that. But
fair enough.
If he does retract on it, that's his responsibility to retract on it. He can not retract on it, but apologize. If he feels the need to apologize, him. I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's fair. So you're pretty much consistent. Like whether you double down, whether you apologize, on you, dude, own it. Fair enough. CK.
I was contemplating calling you about this the other day, but I didn't want to be the white guy that calls his black friend.
I'm calling my black friend. I gotta ask you about this.
Yeah. So I wanted to avoid.
Hold on. Let me call my black friend. Hey,
is this okay? Yeah. Yeah. So, oh my God, I have a lot of thoughts about this. So first of all, objectively, in reality, he did say that word, however many times, 71 times, 100 times, whatever, based on the episodes that they took down. But it's an altered reality. It's a movie, right? You know, you can watch a movie and see a different reality. It's not really real, but it looks real. You know, so somebody did a super cut of him saying this word, however many times that he did, and they did it for a very specific purpose. And it's not because they really give a shit what Joe Rogan said 12 years ago on his podcast, because they didn't care up until recently. And the reason that they care now is because the controversy surrounding him bringing on these doctors that have opinions that go against the grain with respect to the whole COVID thing and vaccines and all the rest of it. So they want to silence him. What is one of the easiest ways that you can silence somebody, especially a white male? It's to dredge up sometimes they use a racial slur. Just plain and simple. Now, I'm not defending him saying that. Like, one of the baselines that I think I agree upon and is generally agreed upon in society is that that's not a great word to say, especially if you're white, right? So I refrain from saying it. But that's a hit job, is what that is. They created that video because they couldn't dissuade people from listening to COVID misinformation, because that whole narrative is quickly falling apart, and thank God. But so they said, okay, well, let me take them down a different way. And they went back 12 years in his archives and literally took the time to listen to hundreds of hours of podcasts in order to find him saying that word. Like, that's ridiculous. It's so transparent what their objective was, that anybody looking at that and saying, that's reality there, that's just old racist Joe Rogan, like, you're an idiot if you think that.
He's got thousands of episodes at 3 hours a clip.
Yeah. And but the thing is that it's an effective tactic, right? Because they know that people aren't searching for the context and things, and will look at certain things and disregard others and make a snap judgment based off of a 3-minute video and say, this is reality. Joe Rogan is a racist. Therefore, all of the people that he has brought on and all the opinions that either he or any of his guests have had are irrelevant, because the N-word.
Baby with the bathwater.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So I hate the fact that he opened himself up to that. But at the same time, when he was doing podcasts 12 years ago, like, if you go back and watch that stuff, it's like what we're doing right now. You know, it's like low production quality, like just hanging out and talking to friends and shit, like nothing too serious. And then he quickly got fame and notoriety and all the rest of it. And so now he's having to deal with this stuff in hindsight. And I don't think he should have apologized either, because the people that are coming after him don't want an apology. They want to destroy him.
Blood.
And now he, like a dog, has shown his belly, and it's fucking over. So
what do you? So, I kind of agree with that, but you got to think about strategically here too. Like, not knowing that Kay listened to Rogan fairly frequently. Think about who they're targeting with a video like that. They're not coming after you or me or Makayla, people that are already in his audience, because you or I would see that. Even you, Kay, not seeing it to this point, you see that video, you're going to be like, what the fuck is this? Rogan's not a racist. This is stupid. And you're going to disregard it. That video is for the fence sitter, the person that's in between, the person that's never listened to him before, the person that's maybe considering, crap, you know, this guy was kind of right about some of this stuff, or some of these doctors he had on might have been credible. Let me go back and listen to some of this stuff. That's the person that they're actually going after with these kind of attacks. It's not the person that's listened to 1,500 episodes of his and probably knows him better than some of his family does from listening to him talk that much. They're looking for the person that still hasn't made their mind up. That's the scary part to me. Because like you said, it creates a reality that we can at least agree whether it's real or not. I guess it's semantic. It's not the baseline. It's not where we're operating from. And essentially, whether it was created on a computer or in somebody's brain, it was created after the fact with existing information.
And Kay said something earlier that I want to touch on. You said something to the effect of, if it's not harming people, then it can't be bad or whatever. And I agree with that. I think that's a societal norm. That's a baseline. As long as you're not causing harm to somebody, who cares what you do, right? With respect to Joe Rogan and the current controversy, the argument is being made that because he has such a large audience of impressionable people, and he brings on XYZ guest that has a differing opinion, particularly about COVID vaccinations, that misinformation is doing harm to people because they're making decisions based off of it and maybe not getting vaccinated or maybe not wearing a mask or whatever the case is, right? So those people are dying in droves because of the information that they've received from Joe Rogan. And so I get muddied up with these things a lot because I think they're important, especially when people attempt to change what that baseline is. You say not harming people. What I hear is I don't punch you in the face, you don't punch me in the face. I don't stab you, you don't stab me, right? But now people are seeking to change that definition and make it a little bit more ambiguous. That way they can use it for political means and purposes. And I understand your perspective, Kay, and just trying to kind of have like a hands-off approach to stuff. And I can respect that. And I had a similar opinion not long ago myself, but I think it was Ralph Nader said that you should turn on to politics, otherwise politics will turn on you. And I would just say that it's easy to kind of have that far away perspective and think these things, but eventually you may turn your head and come back to a world that you no longer recognize, and it isn't a good one if you're not an active participant in the discussion. And I think the discussion is so heated right now, like I don't think anybody can afford to not be a participant because it's going to shake out one way or the other. And the way that we avoid violence and conflict as a society is by talking. So.
And as I said, I don't agree with the censorship whatsoever. That's a giant issue that it goes back to my point of not taking responsibility for somebody else's actions. He could have an awful person on there, but somebody, a COVID denier on there, a flat earther or something. It's to get their perspective. It doesn't mean it's fact, it's for somebody to take that information and look into it more. You shouldn't take what somebody says to you as stone cold fact. You don't know this person. You don't know their credentials. It's for you to be like, that's interesting. Let me look into it. And I feel like people are taking it as he's saying that every one of his guests are being fully honest. And he's not saying that. He's not saying that everything they're saying is true, but too many people are thinking that's how he's advertising it.
Sure. He's had Jack Dorsey on, he's had Sanjay Gupta on. It's not just one side. Like he's allowing a space for other people. Just because the other side of the aisle doesn't necessarily volunteer as often, I mean, the door's still open. I think he gives a voice to whoever's willing to talk.
That's why he's so popular. And thank God, right? Because it's like you see that and you understand that it seems at least that most people appreciate that perspective. And it's only like the far ends of the spectrum that are really arguing about it. Speaking of flat Earth, Eddie Bravo.
He's on there all the time, man. He's a big flat Earth guy. Like the example you used of Makayla, politics participating or getting on you if you don't get into it. It's not so much a matter of not being in the discussion or not getting into the fight. I think certain people just choose to affect the fight differently. Makayla, perfect example. What she does with our group, I can tell you she's front lines. It's just not arguing back and forth with people that she's got no interest in convincing. She's on the other side of things, affecting culture, inspiring young ladies to learn martial arts, teaching yoga in our class, helping us get people transitioning from yoga programs into martial arts programs so they can learn a little bit more of that personal autonomy. there are other ways, I think, to affect that change rather than steering culture is a big one. Because look at where we're at now. Culture we've kind of let it go into autopilot, and that baseline, like we were talking about before, has taken a hard shift over to one side. So doing things like providing positive culture, I think, are taking a very active role in affecting that exact same outcome that you're talking about.
I'm glad you point that out because it's very true. If somebody's actions are somewhat intangible or dissimilar from what I'm doing, then I can tend to have the view of like, what are you doing? You know, and not give credit where credit's
Sure.
due. So I appreciate you pointing that out, because definitely I get stuck. You know?
Absolutely. And it might not be as simple as, you know, arguing the nuts and bolts, or even, you know, not that we're arguing, just having a discussion or whatever, because, you know, her personality wise, this one would rather choke you out than talk to you. I know how Kay is, but you know, at the same time, like I said, I know that she's in there doing the work. She's in there busting ass, competing, showing these girls what it's about, teaching. Like it's going on, just on a different front. You know what I'm saying?
I would also really like to add that I feel like a lot of the people that the majority tends to argue with isn't the majority of the people in the world. It's just like the loudest people on the internet. Like that's such a small majority of people. Like I like Joe Rogan. I've never heard of that video. If I go outside and ask my neighbors, most of them have not seen that video. You know, you're just hearing the backlash from a small percentage on the internet who wants to be heard.
Yeah. We talked about dead internet last week. I didn't mean to cut you off again. I'm sorry, but Twitter, there's reports that like 80-something% of comments on Twitter are bots. Like, yeah, just stirring the turkey.
We're being told this is what our society's like, but is it really like that when you talk to the actual people?
Even for all the millions of people that they, because they're using political action committees, super PACs, they're using social for official polls and shit now. Like, think about that. Taking a litmus for the country based on an extremely partisan leaning social media site, and then superimposing that information on an entire nation, where I think less than the residents of the state of Florida make up the entire population of Twitter, but that acts as a small scale version of the entire country in terms of some of these polls. It's a really scary thing to think about, right? I don't have a Twitter. I'm not even on there. So they're not getting my opinion anytime they ask this stuff. That's a great point, Kay. Like, who are they actually talking to? Where's this baseline that they're actually getting from? The uproar, all the people that are upset, that represents the whole country being butthurt. Who's really upset? It's another good point, another good question in terms of perspective, right? All these media things are reporting this, that, and the next CNN says this, and this one says that, and Rogan. You listen to Rogan, you've never even heard this shit.
Exactly. Like I listened to him today on my ride home, and I was like, no idea that there was controversy going on.
It's crazy shit, man. Absolutely crazy.
He's got some lit shows about UFOs.
Yeah, I like
last episode. Very entertaining.
Extremely. Do you Kay, do you ever listen to Sam Tripoli? You should check out Tinfoil Hat too. You'll love it. Especially some flat earth shit. Really appreciate you being here and lending your insight to us, both from the athletic perspective and your personal philosophy. Is there any closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
Not particularly. Censorship is shitty, and you should form your own opinions. That's pretty much it.
Fucking love it. Screw censorship. Do your own research. Love it. CK.
I think we need more of Rogan, and I hope that this isn't the sunset on what he's doing. I really like the discussions that he has and what we're doing here, because it challenges me to think about things in a different way. And I know a lot of people say, just have an open mind, just be open-minded. And it's like this thing that people say, and it's just like lip service. No, like you actually have to be engaged in the conversations and talk to people that have differing opinions from you, even if that's scary because there might be conflict, right? That's actually being open-minded, is taking the action to be challenged in a conversation and maybe changing your mind. So, yep.
Again, I appreciate you guys putting your 2 cents in, and same thing like you just said, CK, really getting my brain going. I love having these conversations because of where it ends up. And it's just so you guys know, watching this after the fact, we don't write this stuff. I plan the presentation, or if Chris presents, we'll plan the presentation, but the conversation's organic. We just like to see where these things develop in stimulating thought and just continuing down the line. I agree, censorship is garbage. You should always, always, always do your own research, find and confirm information before you take it as fact. Also realize that if you look for a specific set of facts rather than truth, that you can easily confirm your own biases. Listening is different than hearing. So when we talk about these collaborative conversations and getting together and different opinions, it's very different for me to hear what you're saying so that I can respond to it and one-up you, versus listening to what you're saying so that I can understand your perspective. And that's what allows us to get to these places of collaborating and figuring out societal baselines. So that's really all I got for the night. Collaborate, do your own research. Censorship is garbage. Love you guys and appreciate you. And we will catch you on the next one.
I appreciate you.